favorite team from popular entertainment, movies, and or television, and why?
My favorite team. Wow, there's a lot of teams that I like. I like a good team-based drama.
No.
Shocking. I'm going to say Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, and her Scooby Gang.
Scooby Gang.
Yep.
Yes.
Especially in, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Buffy, you're like late to the game. But when Xander like saves the day with a hug, I love it.
It's legit.
It's legit.
That's legit for reals. I'm going to go with the classic first Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
Yes. Not that I didn't like the second Ghostbusters or even the reboot, you know, with Melissa McCarthy and
very fun,
which I also enjoyed, by the way. I loved it.
How can you not enjoy the Ghostbusters?
A lot of people like totally panned the reboot.
Well, those people don't like women.
I guess. I mean, I just thought it was a different movie, though. You can't go in thinking
that's true. It's not the same.
The same Bill Murray, you know, Dan Aykroyd team. It's just a different mix, you know. So, you know, so there's a lot of parallels there, but I just love the chemistry that team has, that they develop with working with each other. And there's just a lot of melding of frequencies, I think.
The melding of the frequencies. Yes. Don't cross the streams.
Don't cross the streams.
Okay.
So welcome, my friends, to the Kimberley Coach Show, where we bring you actionable practices that you can use in your leadership and collaboration today. I'm Coach Kimberley is right next to me. And what if, as a leader, you had some way to know your team's preferences and motivation? What if you had a little window into their souls?
Oh, wow. You sound super creepy. Into their souls. I mean, I guess that's good. Or at least how they collaborate.
That's good too.
I mean, I love a good team map because I'm super visual and it makes it easy for people to see at a glance how our teams are relating to each other and interacting as we tackle the teams at hand or the tasks at hand.
Yeah, I think having and taking time to build that map, you know, is a lot of shops don't do it. Let's be honest about it.
Almost none. I've never been at a shop that's like, here's our map. I've helped shops
other than
make a map.
Teams that we've helped them build the map, literally. But I think there's a lot of advantages, and Kimberly and I do a lot of work with language is a language of value. And we work with tools like the Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and CliftonStrengths and now the MPACT. Yes. And working with teams to help them understand themselves a little bit more, understand their teammates a little bit more. But there's different tools for different teams and they produce different kinds of maps.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Too. So I want to kick off with the first one, which is my favorite, which is VAK. Okay. Now, a lot of people slam a lot of these tools, by the way, and that's fine. It's just because they don't understand them and we get it. It's okay. As long as you keep them in the right place, I think that's another thing that's important, because if you're expecting like an absolute answer on some of this stuff versus like understanding where your people's preferences are, where they're coming from.
Yes. We're not trying to take an assessment and say, this is everything you could ever know about a person and they will never change. Just put them in this bucket right here.
Here is your box.
Customize
you can go live in.
Their perfect tasks. But you can use some of these tools to get some insight into the preferences and the way that people approach things. And that can actually be really helpful. Why don't you tell us what VAK stands for in case people haven't done the VAK?
Right. Yeah. So VAK stands for Visual Auditory Kinesthetic, and it has to do with communication styles. Everybody has a preference on how they consume and broadcast their communication. And it's a lot like whether you have a preference for strawberry, chocolate, or vanilla ice cream. You know,
Chocolate.
if I offer you
Peanut butter.
if I offer you ice cream, you're going to have a preference, right? Why do you have that preference? You don't know. Do you care?
Aliens.
Also, yes, aliens.
I just steal your line. Yes, I did.
Aliens all day long, for sure. Everybody has preferences about how they communicate. And most people think that, everybody's all the same. As a matter of fact, I was reading a terrible blog post the other day that's like, the foundational truth is that every person is the same. And I'm like, no.
Somebody went back to the 50s and is in a very factory mindset.
Right.
People as robots. Just plug and play.
I was reading this post. All I could do is shake my head, because that's the foundational mistake that most people make. And beginning with how people communicate visually. Like when people who have a strong visual communication style, they speak in pictures. Like, this girl sitting next to me. Oh my gosh, which is great, right? Once I understood that,
right? Yeah.
You've had
a little time to get on board.
Yeah, we've had 20 plus years, to figure out how each other communicates. But then a lot of people like myself have an auditory preference of communication, and then there's kinesthetic. And kinesthetic is very, very different on how people process information, and then everybody has a primary and a secondary on that. And so once you understand how you communicate, if you have a team map around communication, quite frankly, this is the fastest and easiest one you can do.
Oh, yeah. It's super easy. Nobody's getting into any vulnerable places. It's just, how do you prefer to learn or express a thing? But it's really helpful, because if you are, for example, like me, a very visual learner and a very, very visual communicator, and you are working with an auditory person,
this guy,
you sometimes need to do a little translating in order to communicate things like instructions and training well.
Right.
And especially for people who are kinesthetic, which is the most left out of most of our learning modalities. These are people who put their hands on things to learn it. So like, they don't actually want you to tell them anything until they've touched it with their hands and kind of played around on it a little bit. And if you know that can save you both a lot of time.
Oh, yeah. When you look at a map of a team that's primarily visual, and you've got like one person who's primarily auditory and one person who's kinesthetic, you can pretty much know where the communication breakdowns are going to happen.
Who is frustrated on this team?
Yeah, right. Who's going to leave first? and so I think once you have that understanding of people's preference, you can tune in. So for example, if I know somebody is kinesthetic auditory, okay, like my dad. Okay, my dad is kinesthetic auditory all the way. And when I want to have a decent conversation with him, we need to go for a walk. And it makes all the difference in the world, because he's in his body, he's moving. But if I want to have a conversation with Kimberley and we're walking, it can work, because she's become accustomed to my auditory mode. But if we want to have a good conversation, we need to sit down and face each other across the table, usually with coffee and or other adult beverages. So
that's true. Also with Ben's dad, you really learn how kinesthetic he is when he tries to teach you how to dance. I speak from experience, because
it drags you around the floor.
As a visual person learning from a kinesthetic auditory person, he was like, just do it, and just dragged me all around in circles. I did not learn how to dance, but it was fun. Very fun. Anyway.
So you want to hit Myers-Briggs?
Yes, I think we should blow through these.
Yeah.
But we also have a course that goes really in depth on all of these tools. So it's on our YouTube channel if you are more interested in learning specifically about these. But Myers-Briggs deals with people's preferences in 4 categories. And the categories are kind of polarities. So the one that everybody knows is introversion and extroversion, although most people know it incorrectly. They think like an introvert means you're shy, which is not necessarily the case at all. Ben is introverted, kind of in the middle.
I find myself on the ambivert spectrum there, kind of smack dab in between the two. So.
0% shy. Like no one in the whole world has ever called Ben shy. But it has to do with how you get your energy. So people who are extroverted get their energy from being around people, and people who are introverted need to kind of recover after they've been around people. They get their energy by having time internally to process. But there's like 4 of those poles, and knowing that kind of thing can be really helpful. These can change over time, their preferences.
Mine certainly have.
But we've seen this especially on a team where most people are either very introverted or extroverted. People tend to hire whichever one they are. So you end up with mostly who you are. So if you have a very extroverted team, you have a couple introverted people, then whenever they don't want to talk and be chatty, then the extroverts can easily kind of default to like, oh, they don't like us, or they're being jerks, or they're aloof, and they really just need to get their work done, and they need space for that. And the opposite is true. Like if you have a very introverted team and then you have a me on your team and they're always asking like, so how was your weekend? It will be very irritating to the rest of the team. Like, oh, she doesn't care about her work. And so there's all these assumptions we make when people are different than us. And knowing the language of preferences can be really helpful. Like, oh, she's not being a jerk. She's just an introvert. I'm going to give her space because this task is very important, you know? And so we can go through all of those Myers-Briggs polls and kind of see where that is really helpful. One of them is how we organize and order our world. And so Ben and I, we are the same first 3, E and F. And then the last one is either judging or perceiving. The judging person, which sounds terrible because of how we use the word judging now, but it just has to do with a person has a rubric of how something should be. They have a plan. They like things to go according to plan. They like to know what the expectations are. And then the perceiving person likes to decide how the day will go as they perceive things. Like as things come up, they're very adaptable.
Oh, there's a plan? What?
Why would we want to plan? That sounds like a box I'm going to be stuck in, you know? So we, for probably the first 10 years of our marriage, a lot of our fights are essentially J versus P, where I'm like, we had a plan. Why aren't you doing the plan? And he's like, why are you so attached to the plan? But having language around that has been really helpful for our sanity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the Enneagram.
Yes,
let's. Now, the Enneagram as a team map, you don't want to step into this one unless your team has a very high degree of trust. Because as a team, when you get into Enneagram, you start getting into like childhood wounds and trauma. And it's
I mean, it's not where you start, don't worry. But it's kind of built in. It has to do with how you react to stress and what your habitual patterns for coping are. Like your fears and your desires. And so it can very quickly feel very vulnerable.
Yeah. So there's 3 primary centers we talk about in the Enneagram: head, heart, and gut, in terms of how people process. And then also there's then how they deal with conflict, which we call stances. And you have the assertive. The assertive, of course, goes after. The withdrawing is like, whoa. And then you have the compliant, which are going to lean in, but they're also looking for how can they make things right. And so it's really an interesting way to look at a team, but it's not for the faint of heart, and, like we've done a decent amount of work with churches, and for church staff, there's usually a decent level of trust already there. And so they can kind of lean into that tool if they like, but in most corporate environments, we don't recommend it, to be honest. Unless people are really digging into the Enneagram to begin with, and there is a high level of trust there, because it can really dig up some, I don't know how to put it.
It's really not the kind of thing that we would recommend you roll out to your 200 person or 2,000 person large company. Everybody take this test and then share your results. It's not going to be a very effective tool for that. If you have a close-knit leadership team, or if you're just doing your own leadership executive coaching, it can be really useful because it's going to get into why do you respond to things the way that you do. If you're using Enneagram in a corporate setting, the best thing I think is to understand the stances. So there's 9 types on the Enneagram. And so 9 things doesn't make a very easy map. But when you get into the centers and the stances, you can divide into the 3 sides of things. And with the stances, knowing if you are assertive, withdrawing, or compliant can be really helpful. And knowing if the person sitting across from you is one of those, is also helpful. So if you can imagine a very assertive boss, they're like kind of like the take charge. If I don't like how something's going, I'm going to change it. Like they move into action really quickly. They speak their mind pretty easily. And let's say you're having a person on your team who's very withdrawing when they are challenged, then what you can have is kind of like this assertive withdrawing chase, where that person's getting less and less present and you're getting more and more in their face. And it can be really unhelpful. So knowing something like that can make you kind of say your piece and then say, I know you're going to need some time to process this. And then the other stance is the compliant stance. And you can have a similar kind of dynamic with any of these, but compliant people are looking for input before they make their decision. And so knowing that can really help you as you lead. And if you know that you're a compliant person, that can help you, like, who are the best advisors? Who are the people that I want to choose to take input from? So things like that can be really helpful. You can kind of scrape the surface of the Enneagram for corporate work, and then people can do their own deeper dive. And I do not recommend starting or even talking about the childhood wound portion in your corporate environment.
And that leads to usually awkward conversations in the HR office.
Yes,
and no one needs any more of those. So anyway, let's talk about CliftonStrengths, which is another one of our favorites.
Formerly known as StrengthsFinder, if you've taken that.
So we've got 4 quadrants in this one, and it makes for a really easy team map. And
so easy.
It's also one of my favorites because it's wildly positive. And there are no discussions of childhood wounds or trauma. It's about how you work the best versus trying to like shore up your weaknesses.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the different, real quick, blow through the quadrants real fast. And I know there's a good story you've got for this one too.
I have lots of good stories for this one, but I don't know which one you're talking about. But there are 4 quadrants: the executing, the influencing, the strategic thinking, and the relationship building. And so what you can do is kind of look at everybody's top 5 strengths. These are the places where they're kind of like in their sweet spot. They're going to do the best work with ease and grace. Doesn't mean they can't do other things. It's just that what's going to come easily will be in these kind of corners of their strengths. And so what you can do is map your team and see where you have the most gifting. So, for example, I've been on a team for, like 7 years, where we are primarily strategic thinking and relationship building, a little bit of influencing, but not any executing. Executing is like the get stuff done people. They're the people who like really get a kick out of checking off a box. They're like, yes, I had a task and I did it. Maybe I should not be explaining what the executing people are, but I think they're like unicorns and amazing. Like they just like to do things. I like to talk about things. I find that in the strategic thinking quadrant, we have lots of ideas, but when it comes to actually putting the ideas into play, it's like, that sounds boring, So if you know you're low on executing in a team, you need a lot of project management to make sure things are actually moving forward, even if you've been talking about them for a long time. Another example would be when I first learned StrengthsFinder. Is this the story you're talking about?
Probably.
I don't know. When I first learned StrengthsFinder, I was working really closely with a person who was highly executing. And I'm almost entirely in the relationship building with a little bit of strategic, I think influencing I've won. But primarily I am a people person, and I was working in a nonprofit that's very about people. And so the fact that this person wasn't wired like me, at first I really felt like, why are you in this job? But as we did the StrengthsFinder and we talked about his mix and my mix, we really kind of fell into a rhythm of me sharing what I'm noticing from the people angle and him helping me manage the tasks that were required. And we actually made a really good team for many years once we could see the strength in the other person who is like very, very opposite of us.
Yeah. And that's one of the keys to all of this team mapping,
right?
And these different tools is understanding preference and then leading into the preference, not away from, because we don't want you to do things the way everyone else does. We want you to do them the way that you do them.
Right.
And a manager who works in the different quadrants, like a strategic thinking manager, is going to be very different than an influencing manager. Now, they can still do great jobs, both of them, but they're going to go about it differently, because it's not about necessarily getting the work done. The work will get done, but the work will get done differently.
Right.
And that's, I think, the important thing, because how I would accomplish something is not how somebody else would do it. And there's value in
or
that.
Should.
Right.
Like a way that people misuse these assessments is that they try to say like, well, every salesperson has to have influencing strengths. That's the thing that has to happen. But a person who's high in influencing may be a great salesperson, but a person who's high in relationship building can also be a great salesperson. But the way they do it will be very different. Right?
Yeah.
And so if they try to do it like an highly influencing person, it might not work for them. But if they try to do it as who they are, then they will probably be successful. So a lot of the work is around figuring out like, how am I wired for the work that I'm doing? And how can I set myself up? How can I set my people that are on my team up for a win based on who they are and what they bring to the table? Because we have a lot of people coming into jobs and trying to act like someone else, like whoever trained them, whoever the boss is, whoever the superstar is. And then they're only ever like a second-rate version of that person. They're not the first-rate version of themselves. They're not bringing their genius to the table if they're trying to act like someone else. And so a lot of this is around unlocking, kind of like leveling up people to be like to really own their own genius.
Yep. And so the last one is the newest one out of our batch here, is the MPACT. And they've got a super cool tool called the Spider. It's a spidergram that maps
we love it.
your whole team across the 5 different quotients: mentor, pioneer, aligner, champion, and teacher.
Right.
And talk about an easy map. I mean, literally, it's just done for you.
Yeah.
Another reason why I like it, because otherwise, a lot of times in team mapping, we're building the map on a whiteboard or with Post-it notes or something. That's fun. It's very kinesthetic, and I like it because I'm auditory kinesthetic.
Right.
But for visual people, like the MPACT visuals are just like awesome.
Amazing.
And so we've already heard us talk to Joe Shannon about that in the previous episode, and I know we keep talking about it because it's
the last episode.
It is, the last episode, right? The very last one we did.
If you didn't listen to that and you're interested in the MPACT, you should go back and learn from Joe.
Super cool. It's all about how you elevate and collaborate. Like it's like these other tools are cool because it helps you understand yourself a little bit more. It helps to give you a foundation for other people. But the MPACT is all about other people, and that's a different tack on the whole thing.
A lot of these tools are about personal development and personality.
And that's good.
And the MPACT, it will help you understand yourself a little bit too.
Yeah.
But it is specifically about how we collaborate, which makes it just excellent for the workforce.
Yeah. So when a shop goes and gets a team map,
okay,
what do they do with it then? Because that's always the question that, like people ask, like, okay, well, we've got this thing.
Right. Frame it.
We've had our workshop. Now what? What does it look like? What's our next steps with it?
Well, there are a couple things that you can do. And the first is that you can create space for different preferences to help set every person up for a win, like we've been talking about. So once you have language to say, okay, most of our team is this, but you are like this, we want more of your genius, and we're going to protect the space for that so that you can do your best work. And so it can really create like a very supportive environment. I was thinking, what's the opposite of a hostile environment? A very supportive environment for a person to really bloom as who they are in their work.
Yeah. And the next thing that you can do with this is you can literally, once you understand the diversity that you have on your team, is lean into it, leverage that diversity and understand that there's immense amounts of value there that is probably your competitive advantage. that a lot of people are like, well, what is our competitive advantage? Well, you've got individuals who have unique perspectives on the universe. And so leverage those perspectives, because you're going to have people who can see things coming that you'll never see. Right? Just as an easy example in that space. So
the people who have the kind of minority perspective, for example, if you're a highly executing team and you have like a one relational person, they are probably going to be the quietest in meetings, because the overwhelming majority of people doesn't want to stop and talk about relationship building. They're moving on with the tasks because that's who the team is, right? And so we kind of learn when we are the outlier to be quiet often. And so when you can invite that in, you immediately start to see your blind spots. So for example, if you have that highly executing team, then if you ask the person who's like highly relationship building, if you say, what are we missing here about our people? Is there a relationship that we should be paying more attention to? Is there something we could do to make our clients more of a community? And you kind of create the space that isn't naturally there because most people don't function in that space well. When you do that, when you actually invite the perspective that is the quietest, then you will get wisdom that will help you. Like your intelligence as a team will get so much higher by doing that.
Yeah. So the last one, we talked about this earlier already. Kimberly's already mentioned it, but I think we need to mention it one more time, because I've heard a lot of stories about people and managers and organizations really who weaponize these tools and can potentially weaponize the team map and use it to, rather than to lean into preferences and strengths and advantage, to use it to manipulate and to like just get people to do their bidding. For some people, it's just another tool to enact their will, and just have more automatons and more robot arms, and that's not what these are for. It's rather an understanding. Don't weaponize or limit the tools. Help them instead tackle the task the way that they would do it, not the way that you want them to. And I think the weaponization is where that's the big danger in any of this stuff. So
yeah, the temptation is to decide what tasks a person can do based on this kind of an assessment, but that is not the purpose of these assessments. The purpose is to figure out how a person will do the job that they are wanting to do. And so where I really see it get weaponized often is where people say, well, we're really looking for a pioneer for that role. And so because you're not a pioneer, we're not even going to consider you. When you would just do it differently than they're envisioning, but you might do it fantastically and you might feel very like excited to do that job, And so what we want to do is to create a language of value with these tools and not a language of limitation.
Right. Like, so many people who have said that people who are mentors don't make good entrepreneurs. What? No, that's not how this works, kids.
They've just known some very not mentory entrepreneurs.
Right. And how a mentor starts a business is going to be very different than a pioneer, than an aligner even, because when you have like someone who's got an aligning quotient in the MPACT system, their business and their entrepreneurship is going to look wildly different.
Right.
And, in terms of effectiveness, they can be just as effective and get the same results, but how it's done is going to look different. And that's the thing I really want to bring home with this, is that as you're looking at your team map, what's next, the biggest understanding that I think you can get is not whether or not it's going to get done, but rather understanding it's going to get done differently in a different path. Right.
Yep.
So that's
make a team map
today. And so to you, our listener, thank you for tuning into the Kimberley and Coach Show. You can always catch us at KimberleyCoach.com. If you want to talk about this more, you can set up a time to hang out with us. But thanks again for hanging out, because here at the Kimberley Coach Show, we totally endorse putting stickers on the back of your laptop that make you happy. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.